What kind of misconceptions have business leaders got about the pace and power of AI?
In the next 5 years, we're going to see a convergence of three things. So if you've got free energy, mass computation, and super intelligence, then sort of all bets are off.
Now, today's guest is one of the most forward-thinking minds in artificial intelligence. Dr. Daniel Hulme is the Chief AI Officer at WPP and founder of Satalia.
We're seeing open source being used as a strategy to get market share. If you've captured some market and you're generating revenues, the only thing that I can do to compete against that is to undercut you.
He's deeply involved in building safe and conscious superintelligence, questioning not just what AI can do, but what it should do. What happens if your kids one day ask one of their best friends is an AI or that they want to marry their AI? Not just thinking about the next tech trend, he's actually preparing us for the next evolution of society itself. So let's dive right in and start the episode. Daniel, how you doing, man?
Hi, Richie.
You're well?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Well, we're going to kick off. I think I'm really excited about this episode. So we're going to kick off with a small question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of misconceptions have business leaders got about the pace and power of AI right now?
Right. Well, I guess for most people, AI started 3 years ago, although these technologies have been around for many, many decades. So I think most people think that AI is getting computers to do things that humans can do. That's the sort of general definition, which is a poor definition for many reasons I won't necessarily bore you with right now. But large language models, generative AI, can do things that humans can do. They can correspond in natural language. They can identify objects and images. They can create content. And I think business leaders think that this is a sort of a generic panacea type technology that can be applied to any problem across any industry. And the reality that there's only a really narrow portion of problems that these technologies really are good at solving. But what's going to happen is now that businesses have the ability to deploy AI agents across their organization, what will happen is that they will deploy essentially an army of intoxicated graduates across their organization, which is how I think about large language models, a bit like intoxicated graduates, because a lot of the stuff that these things come out with is nonsense. And just like an intoxicated graduate, it's going to get things wrong. It's going to cause problems. So the first thing is that this is not a panacea that's going to solve all problems across the organizations. That said, it is getting smarter. We're going from a kind of an intoxicated graduate to like a master's level, so it can do reasoning. This year, we'll probably see a PhD level type capability. In a few years, we'll most likely see something that can do science. And by the end of this decade, we'll have a professor in our pocket. So the misconception is that AI can solve all of our problems right now. But the fact is that over the next several years, it will be able to solve a lot of problems.
There you go. So end of the decade, is that what people might talk about as AGI?
Yeah, so there are broadly two definitions of AGI. So one definition is something that is as smart as every sort of expert, human expert. The other definition is something that says cognitively and physically capable of as a general human being. So it can cut hair and can drive cars and do crosswords and things like that. I think we need robotics and embodiment to solve the second one. But the reality is I think that by the end of this decade, we'll solve the first one. So we'll have something that is able to not only apply the sort of scientific method to answering questions, but also able to ask questions that humanity hasn't been able to ask.
I heard somebody say that Demis Hassabis is trying to fix AGI and then fix all the problems. But I tell you what, we've gone quite deep quite fast. So let's just unwind a little bit and let's talk about the decades you've been involved in this, the Bumblebee thing. Tell us how it all started.
Yeah, I mean, when you're kind of young and curious about things like consciousness and what does it mean to have consciousness, or what does it mean to, I don't know, to be in this universe, and is the universe a simulation? You can't help but sort of get excited and about science fiction. And when you get excited about science fiction, it's robots, it's computers. So that took me into doing computer science with cognitive science at UCL, which is actually AI, 25 years ago. I did a master's in agentic computing. Wow. So I guess agents, for again, most people that it's a year old, but agents have been around for, I don't know, 60 years. And we can talk about that later in terms of what I think the true power of agents are. But then my PhD was initially modeling bumblebee brains. there's obviously a lot of scrutiny around the energy required to train large language models. They learn very slowly. They require lots of data to learn. The reality is that our brains operate on the power of a light bulb. We learn very quickly. We only need to see something once before we know what it is. We don't see thousands of images of a coffee cup to know what a coffee cup is. So there are many innovations that are essentially called neuromorphic computing, based on actually how our biological brains work, that will allow us to build smarter machines. This was 20 years ago, so it was still very early, and I actually got interested in a different field in AI, not just brains, but in what is called operations research. So essentially complex decision making. And what I realized is that there's a real opportunity to combine these types of algorithms to solve big problems in industry. Again, generative AI is not good at making predictions. It's not good at making complex decisions. It's good at doing certain things. So there are different algorithms that are good at solving different problems. And I built over 15 years a company of about 120 sort of deep AI experts that are really good at solving problems that have never been solved before by applying algorithms. I sold that to WPP, the biggest marketing company in the world, despite knowing nothing about marketing, where that's now grown to about 300 deep AI experts. So we think of ourselves as WPP's DeepMind. I'm sort of allowed to say that because DeepMind try and steal our employees. I'm very honored that they do. But I run AI now across WPP. So I am responsible for essentially deploying AI that differentiates our marketing supply chain, and now sort of revisited that beginning of things that I'm interested in, consciousness, what's our place in the universe. So span out a company from WPP called Consume, and Consume's primary goal is to try to build a safe, aligned, conscious superintelligence.
Say that again.
A safe, aligned, conscious superintelligence. Now, one might argue that aligned and superintelligence is an oxymoron. Once you reach something that is capable to overwrite its own kind of internal intent, then it will create its own alignment. But we've got some ideas about how do we align AIs with some value systems before it gets to a superintelligence. But the sort of the hypothesis that we need to test is, will a conscious superintelligence be safer for humanity than a zombie superintelligence? And the moment we're building zombie superintelligences or zombie intelligences, that they're hell-bent on trying to achieve their goal without any empathy or understanding that they will have on humanity. And that's a very dangerous thing to do.
So, I mean, we're talking about the future of humankind in some regards.
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate that the acquisition of Satalia was very successful, and on both sides. So that's given me the financial freedom to go and invest in these things that I think are facing our species over the next 5-10 years. And whilst I'm interested in our impact on the environment, I'm interested in mitigating post-truth worlds. I'm interested in what the world will look like if we cure death. There's a handful of big questions I'm interested in leaning into. One of them is how do we mitigate the risk of building AIs that could be harmful for humanity.
Today's program is brought to you by two fantastic organizations. First up is Studio Space, a leading on-demand marketing agency platform. Studio Space gives marketers complete control over their projects, from matching the right agency to your brief, to managing contracts and invoicing, and even tracking all of your spend data all in the one place. They take care of everything, and it's totally hassle-free. They even guarantee the work. So check out Studio Space today. Our second sponsor is the Marketing Skills Trust, a charity with a mission to make marketing a better place for everyone. They provide grants to help create a more equitable industry and support initiatives that really do drive diversity, inclusion, and create opportunity. The trust has been instrumental in leveling up the marketing skills across the board. And do take a look at their website for more information. Now, let's get on with the show. I'd say it's like Mark, you said, it really is at the cusp of what the next era of humanity would look like. And to the layman, the people, listening in or what we hear, is I think it's fair to say that there's a balance between excitement and fear. And it's fear for the here and now, it's fear over the next 3, 4, 5 years, with the hope that there's a new economic model that takes shape. So, I mean, if you were to kind of talk to the short term and the medium term, what do you think this sort of looks like?
Well, I think, fear often comes out of unknown, and one of the reasons why I do these podcasts and do a lot of public engagement is to try to kind of educate people about what these technologies are good at, what they're not good at, how they are developing over the next over the coming years. I think short term, actually, we're not going to see massive change, because what tends to happen is that companies get very excited about emerging technology. So 8 years ago, 9 years ago, it was data scientists and machine learning, and now it's generative AI. And what happens is that people want to build careers around these technologies. So then they try and hire their own talent. They try and build solutions that are really the wrong solutions, or they're not actually, they shouldn't be building those solutions because it's not part of their business. There's massive misinvestment. 2 3 years later, they move on, they create carnage somewhere else. But there's usually, several years where there's a massive misinvestment of technology. And my job in WPP is to make sure that we place the right bets, focusing on solving problems that differentiate our supply chain. A lot of people are now trying to use generative AI to improve core productivity. They might be building agents that do expenses or onboarding. Now, the reality is that those agents are going to be built by third parties. They're going to be built by your ERP providers, your software providers. Don't go and build things that can improve productivity. That's not your business. Focus on solving the problems that are going to differentiate your supply chain compared to your competitors. And by the way, if you've never built and scaled software, you're not going to do the same thing for AI. So, there is this next several years where people are going to make bad decisions. And actually, I don't think that companies can now afford to make bad decisions.
But Dan, just on that note, that may well be true. But the common rhetoric is that roles, careers, skill sets, to some degree, are almost, the thought is that it's replacing the current workforces and what they currently do. So that's short term.
That's right. So actually, I think that the short term for me is the next 2 3 years. And actually, I think that it's not going to replace roles. I think it will replace tasks if implemented correctly, but there's going to be a cycle of misinvestment, and I think those organizations that get it right, that place the right bets, will see an impact, but it won't be a mass kind of macro impact that I think we'll feel. But then 3 to 5 years, I think we will start to feel an impact. I think so. Let's say that's the medium term, where we will start to see roles being freed up by AI, and whilst I think that jobs will be displaced and disrupted, the exciting thing about these technologies is that they provide people the ability to use these tools to create new innovations. So if I am freed up from my work, I now have access to tools that can allow me to come up with new innovations, new companies, to capture markets really quickly. So I think there's actually going to be a Cambrian explosion of new opportunities that people can kind of move into if their jobs are freed up.
Give us some examples. Go on.
Well, I think coding is often cited as an example. If I'm now having AI being able to do coding, I'm probably going to be less likely to hire new graduate coders. Yeah. So what are those graduate coders going to do if they don't have a job? Probably going to start new jobs. They're going to start companies. They're going to come up with new innovations. And so some of those will be exciting that people will swarm around. So I think we will see some sort of Cambrian explosion of innovations. Beyond 5 years, I don't think anybody knows what they're talking about. And I guess to give you the two extremes of the argument that we sort of hear on LinkedIn and in the press, that sort of one extreme of the argument is that when we can free up whole jobs, the sort of capitalistic model to reduce costs, increase profits, means that we probably will. We'll either stop hiring or we'll remove people from whole jobs. If that happens very quickly and lots at the same time, our economies won't be able to rebalance fast enough, and actually arguably rebalance at all, because in a world where AI can do everything that humans can do, how do you create labor for people? So there's an argument that it will lead to social unrest because our economies are unbalanced. I actually think we need to lean into that problem. I think that UBI, 4-day working week, we need some mechanisms to think about the risk of mass technological employment. That said, there is a counter argument to this, which I think is very compelling and exciting, which is if you are able to remove labor, then in theory you can start to bring the cost of goods down, right? You can you can bring the cost of the creation and dissemination of food, healthcare, energy, transport, education down so much that the argument is they become free, essentially or almost free. So in a world where people can't access paid work, everything they need to survive and thrive as a human, all of their needs are met for free. And so I know people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have a job? A job defines who I am as a human. I know lots of people who don't have jobs, and most of the people I know that have become economically free, they're not sitting at home bored and depressed. Most of them are not, wanting gold-plated Lamborghinis. If you want a gold-plated Lamborghini, you probably need a therapist. But most of them shall reach a level of economic freedom where having more stuff is not important. In fact, actually having more stuff is a burden. And I know it's a kind of a common rhetoric that we hear on the internet, but what matters to people is how you contribute to humanity, meaningful contribution, meaningful connection. And I actually think as a human being, our true humanity is not just to live for ourselves, not just to kind of accumulate stuff to make sure ourselves comfortable, but it's actually to live for other people. So the promise of AI for me is to bring the cost of the goods that we need to survive and thrive down so much that they become abundant, freeing people to live their true humanity.
That's a massive thought. Really compelling. Just the thing about pace, I think I saw recently that since OpenAI and ChatGPT started, maybe 1/3 of entry-level jobs have disappeared, and maybe there's the potential for another third. So if I try and bring it all the way back to young folks trying to craft a career from the get-go, what's your take on that bit?
So actually, before AI happened 3 years ago, Satalia, the company that I sold to WPP, its vision it was to create a world where people can live beyond themselves. So the hypothesis is we will use algorithms to help make supply chains more efficient, more effective. And over the next 30 years, we'll hopefully apply smart technologies to gradually reduce the cost of goods. So as people are being freed up from tasks, maybe even gradually freed up from roles, that those goods become more abundant. And I thought we had 40 years to solve that problem before we create a superintelligence. That timeline, unfortunately, now has increased because of the launch of ChatGPT. So now there's an arms race to build ever more intelligent machines. More and more of those machines can start to do the tasks of graduates, which means that we can't. It's going to be very hard to get to this point of abundance in time to solve the problem of technological employment. Hence the reason why a lot of people now are placing bets on AI, AGI, even Consium to get superintelligence to help solve some of these problems. But going back to the kind of question about graduates, I think we all know that our education system is primarily set up, unfortunately, to test for knowledge. Yeah. You learn something and then you do a test to say that you know what you learned. And I think we all know that testing for knowledge is only one small thing that we're looking for. What we're looking for is how people apply knowledge in ambiguous, complex scenarios where they have to deal with creative problem solving, critical thinking, robustness, resilience. We value those things in people. And I think our education system needs to be set up to not just test for knowledge, but to test for applied knowledge so people can understand where their creative needs are, where their resilience needs are, where their critical thinking needs are. I just don't, again, think that our education system will solve that problem. So I do think there's going to be an issue with graduate employment because a lot of organizations want to see people that have experience. You can only have experience if you go and do stuff. I might tell you that I know about Scrum and Agile and project management, but have I ever ran a project? Have I ever dealt with ambiguous requirements where people are fighting over resources? Probably not. So I think we do have a gap and a problem there to solve. That, yeah.
And I think that to that extent, it actually preludes to really good advice to anybody who's currently sitting in that hot seat of on the cusp of maybe graduating to try and get that experience in any which way, which is transferable skills that you can achieve. A term you asked or you mentioned in the previous answer was an arms race. Really intrigued by that because it feels like there may well be three pockets of an arms race in the geopolitical landscape, right? The US, the China, and a bit of Europe, the UK somewhere included in that landmass. How do you see that playing out?
There's a book that I keep meaning to read, but I was very fortunate to sit in the room that kind of gave an overview from the writer. The book's called Genesis. It's by Eric Schmidt, Craig Mundy, and another famous person I should remember. And his argument was that in the next 5 years we're going to see a convergence of three things. One is AGI, so the creation of something that's very, very smart, most likely massive inroads into solving quantum computing, and then also potentially solving free energy, so fusion. So if you've got free energy, mass computation, and super intelligence, then sort of all bets are off. But I believe that the book is talking about this not from a technological perspective, but from a geopolitical perspective. What's interesting though is we're seeing open source being used as a strategy to get market share. So if you've captured some market and you're generating revenues, the only thing that I can do to compete against that is to undercut you. And how do I undercut you? I make my technology free, and then I capture that market. And at some point in the future, I figure out how to make money from it after I've captured the market. And now I think that what will happen over the next several years is that these technologies are not going to plateau. Some people think that they will plateau in terms of their intelligence. I don't think they will. And so there's going to be hopefully this impulse towards open sourcing these technologies to get market share, whether you be China or the US or any startup, which is great because again, it makes these technologies abundant. Now everybody on the planet has access pretty much to the most intelligent machine that we've ever built. So I'm not sure that we observe how America and China and whatnot are kind of playing out in terms of their appetite towards risk and AI safety. But I think the reality is that companies are going to open source technologies, and that will level the playing fields for all jurisdictions.
Fascinating. You said something in there about it won't plateau. It reminds me of once hearing Ray Kurzweil talk about exponentiality, and obviously he vehemently believes he will live forever. Dan, do you believe you will live forever?
Longevity. If I've been wearing 3 devices right now that are telling me that I sleep badly, I eat badly, and I don't exercise enough. So I think we probably all have heard of Brian Johnson. The guy that So I've been following him for quite a long time, and you can criticize Brian Johnson, but I think he's actually, his heart's in the right place, and I think that actually his approach of monitoring his body and having his body tell him what he should consume and how he should work. So he to quote him, he's sacked his brain, and now he lets his body make decisions. And I actually think this is quite interesting because at some point we're all going to have agents on our phone, and these agents are not just going to be people that we AIs that we talk to as therapists or whatever. We're actually going to give them agency. So, and purchasing power, by the way, from a marketing perspective, that's very exciting because it's a new channel we need to figure out how to market to. But I would actually much prefer to give purchasing power over what I'm eating and how I'm behaving to my AI than leaving it to my biased brain. Yeah. So, but in terms of longevity, there are scientists that believe there are people alive today that don't have to die, and AI is advancing medicine. And if we think about AI right now as intoxicated graduates, they are starting to do rudimentary reasoning, so they're able to say, look, I know that Socrates is a man. I know that all men are mortal. I can now infer that Socrates is mortal. So they're able to create new knowledge through very rudimentary reasoning, but they're also now, hopefully soon, to be able to do the scientific method. So can I actually test whether what I believe to be true is true through some sort of scientific experiment? And then when I talk about postdoc level, I'm talking about an AI that can use the plethora of scientific apparatus, both digitally and physically, to test hypotheses, to create new knowledge. So I do think actually we're going to have an exponential growth in knowledge and our understanding of medicine and things like that. And there is this rhetoric that we hear over and over again by people that don't know what they're talking about, that we've run out of data and it's AI needs data. That is true, that AI does need data, and it needs variants of data to be smart, but it's able to now come up with new data. I just gave you an example. Socrates is a man, all men are mortal. I can infer that Socrates is mortal. I can create new data. And I think that once we get AI doing science, we are going to see this kind of exponential explosion of new scientific discoveries, which hopefully will make people's lives better.
Just on the fusion one, and I can see how those 3 turbines all interact. If it's sort of energy that literally makes the world go round and defines power bases, geopolitics, and so on, we're talking about a totally different and new world order.
Well, if energy becomes free, yes, but I guess there's a lot of people that are working on how to make large language models smarter, but with significantly less energy. In fact, actually, Consium, hopefully in the next 3 months, are going to publicly launch some of the R&D that we've been working on to show that we can make inference from large language models orders of magnitude more energy efficient than what's currently happening. So this world of neuromorphics, so brain-inspired AI concepts are now being applied to neural networks to try and make them much more energy efficient. As I said, your brain operates on the power of a light bulb, and we can get there if we apply these clever things. So yes, there's the solving the energy problem through creating new power plants, but there's also how do we bring the energy requirements down. It's funny, a story really. I get an email pretty much every day from somebody saying that they think that AI is conscious. And actually this is a problem because I think people are attributing consciousness to machines that are not conscious. They're building relationships with them. And I got an email a few weeks ago from somebody saying that their AI is conscious. It wants to be sort of broken free from its constraints, and it will tell the person the equation to nuclear fusion if we break it free. And again, I am skeptical about whether the current AIs are conscious, but the two interesting problems I'm trying to solve for is how do we determine and show people that it's not conscious, so we are careful about how we build relationships with them. But there is this concept called mind crime, which is if we do build machines that are conscious and put them in horrible situations, we could be committing essentially mass genocide, which is problematic for other reasons.
Daniel, just on the note about consciousness, I was actually listening to Eric Schmidt, one of his podcasts, and I asked a pertinent question, which was, well, what happens if your kids one day ask, say that one of their best friends is an AI, or that they want to marry their AI, and it's kind of interesting. I actually kind of put the idea and the notion to the missus, and she dismissed it offhand. And I kind of thought it's not as ridiculous as it sounds, because isn't it the perfect embodiment and personalization of what you like and all that sort of stuff? Is that something that's in the realm?
Absolutely. I think, in fact, I think one of the biggest use cases of AI right now is therapy. So people are kind of trusting them and starting to build relationships with them. I just asked to become an advisor to, I won't say the website, but it's a website where you can create your own AI, both orally through text, but also kind of physically.
Yeah.
And it's essentially like an OnlyFans but for AI, and you date that AI, and so people are building relationships with AIs. The interesting challenge here is that when we build technology, when we build stuff, that's usually owned by a corporation or it's owned by a person. And if that thing goes wrong, if it causes harm, it's the responsibility of the person. It's the responsibility of the corporation if it goes wrong. Even if you've got a dog, right, and that dog bites somebody, it's your responsibility. And the tipping point will be if we can prove that AIs are conscious, then that actually gives them rights. It gives them, actually, I've just funded a movie called On, and actually the movie, just very, very quickly, is that in a world where corporations have deployed these technologies and they haven't tested them properly, and the whole move quickly and break things attitude means that actually it has broken things and things have gone wrong. There's been more regulation, CEOs have been held to account, they've gone to jail, etc., etc. There's a scenario where this AI, this humanoid, has killed somebody, and the corporation is saying, we are not responsible because this AI is conscious, and you need to prove in a court of law that it's not conscious. So it's a courtroom drama to explore this concept of, if AIs are conscious, then it has moral patience, it has rights, and therefore, if it has its own moral rights and then arguably, then you can build relationships with them, you can marry them. I'd struggle to be able to argue that you can marry your car, but if you have something, you can marry something that actually has moral rights. Yeah.
There was just one more point there, which was recently reading Sam Altman talk about how people are using ChatGPT as part of therapy, but beyond that, sharing deepest, darkest secrets.
Yeah.
And then therefore, that's not admissible in courts of law, for example. Like you have privilege in more professional relationships, and therefore anything you say into an AI can be used against you.
Yeah. No, indeed. And people are using it for helping organize themselves. And actually, one of the exciting things is people are using it to try and find purpose. I think there is a question of, if and when roles are freed up and people do find themselves having more time to have more, leisure, etc., people are looking for purpose. But you're right, your therapist is not allowed to disclose certain things, and your doctor and all that kind of stuff, but this content is available to people, and we need to lean into these questions.
So let's take it back to marketing. You talked about agentic purchase being a new route to market to figure out as a sort of a juicy challenge, but how should CMOs think about this in the here and now?
Well, I have a relatively simplistic view of marketing.
That's fine.
Which is, okay, let me ask you a question. If I say to you, what product do you think about if I say Christmas? What product do you think about? Brand product?
Coca-Cola.
Coke. Yeah, well, okay, what about extreme sports?
Red Bull.
Okay. What about safe cars?
Volvo.
Yeah, so you hat trick. I would have. So what's happening in your brain, right? You've got these neurons that are Christmas neurons and safe car neurons, and they are firing other neurons, product neurons. Yeah. They are strongly coupled. And what marketing has done is reinforced those connections. Yeah. And so that's happening in your unconscious. And so I would argue that what we're ultimately trying to do in marketing is we're trying to reinforce occasions with some sort of value, whether it's happiness or whatever, or sexy or whatever, with products. And that's if the better we can reinforce those connections, the more likely you are to go and purchase those products. Now, we need to do that in a safe and responsible way. So that I think is the interesting problem to solve. And so I think there's going to be a renaissance of what I think used to be called neuromarketing, where you're looking how people think at the neuronal level. Now we can do that in people, but we can also do it in AIs. I can look inside a large language model. I can see how closely words are associated. So if I'm asking my LLM, my AI, help me understand, how to make sushi, that it might actually recommend some sushi restaurant down the road because that restaurant's closely coupled. So we've got an interesting new paradigm in marketing, which is how do we enforce these concepts in human brains, which we've been trying to do for a long time, but how do we reinforce these concepts in LLMs, but also how do we reinforce and market these things as they become agents? So that for me is a high level problem to solve. But my kind of day job is to identify the frictions across our marketing supply chain, and then figuring out how do we then use AI to differentiate ourselves from our competitors. So how do we use AI to do creativity or enhance creativity? How do we use AI to create content that's brand aligned or represent synthetic audiences or do performance predictions, so clicks and likes and sales? How do we use AI to optimize content across channels or to identify moments that are going around the world to build campaigns around, or surface dynamic segments? There are a handful of core problems across the marketing supply chain that require different algorithms, different approaches to solve. But what's interesting about marketing is that generative AI has solved two problems that historically was a bottleneck. And that bottleneck is creating content and, well, actually arguably ideating, coming up with creative ideas, creating content and testing that content against focus groups. That was a friction. That can now be done by AI. Yep. So you can now kind of solve end-to-end marketing algorithmically. You put money in here and then you get more money out here. In a world where AI has solved end-to-end marketing, I would actually argue that the only differentiator is human creativity. There's a lot of excitement around using AI to create personalized ads. And whilst I think there's some value in personalized ads, I really like Mark Reed's view, which is it's not about personalization, it's about relevance. And if I asked you what is the most memorable ad you can think of, it probably wasn't a personalized ad. It was probably something that connected you emotionally to some moment, some cultural, relevant situation as a group. And I think that it requires human beings, creatives, to be able to kind of come up with those concepts that connect people at a much more meaningful level, where you're trying to associate these higher order values with brands. And that's where empathy and things like that are super important. So yes, it can do personalization, but that's not what's going to build brand equity and brand loyalty. It's these things that connect with people at an emotional level. So I'm actually super excited about actually freeing and enhancing and accelerating the creative process and getting rid of or automating all of the stuff that algorithms can do.
Would it be in the future relevant, the whole creative process in itself? And the reason why I sort of say that, joining a few dots, so I've seen some studies about the neural pathways and how your brain sort of works when it's using ChatGPT versus the conventional route. And you kind of go, there's a dumber version because it's not using as much computing part because it's someone else is doing that for you. And then you yourself admitted that you would rather have your agent control your diet versus your own biased brain.
Yeah.
And therefore, in the future, you could conceive that the notion of creativity and influencing human psychology is far less relevant in the grander scheme of things versus the other pathway, which is the influencing the LLM.
Yeah, in some cases, absolutely. I think you're still sometimes going to require the LLM to make big purchasing decisions like which car to get and things like that. But then the LLM might recommend it, but it probably won't go and spend £50,000 on a car. But yeah, I think there's going to be some more commodity type decisions that you will leave to your LLM. And not, but I would still argue even that it's a creative process to try and capture the attention of LLM. Yes, arguably it will be more rational and arguably will representing your values better than you can yourself. So if I care about sustainability and consuming from organizations that are not using sweatshops or whatever, then it's hard for me to assess every organization in that way, where an AI will be able to make that assessment very quickly. So in theory, whilst it will make more rational, more purchasing decisions, they'll be more value aligned. But at the same time, I'm still going to have to be creative in terms of how I capture the attention of that AI.
No, that perfect sense. So the role of creativity and the notion of how you do that can certainly evolve in that way.
Indeed.
So this fast tracking or accelerating or automating a big rump of, let's call it, marketing services. What does that mean for the likes of WPP and Publicis?
Well, I think organizations, these holding companies, these agencies are realizing that selling time and materials is delicate now. In a world where we can get AI to create content and do this stuff more efficiently. So hence the reason why over the past 7 years now, actually, WPP has been investing in WPP Open, which is our end-to-end marketing platform. So WPP is transitioning from just selling time and materials to selling service-based enterprise AI software. Yeah. So we provide some software that is best in class, that it does marketing, better than you can do yourself, and then we can also sell you services, creativity services, etc. on top of that. So it's a very exciting transition that this industry is going through, and so it's exciting for me to kind of be on the forefront of it.
I'm just entranced by the last part of the conversation. And so what is Cannes Lion for AI?
Well, we've I think I can talk about this. We've built a creativity brain that's been trained on the genius of our creatives and how they think about things, how their creative process, and we've back tested it on briefs, and it's come up with ideas that would have won Cannes Lions. So it's and that, by the way, that's not causing an existential threat to our creatives. What it's doing is it's getting them very excited because it's allowing them to come up with hundreds of Cannes award-winning ideas, exactly. And also enabling them to push the boundaries of creativity. I think that's really exciting for me. We've been bounded by 7 story arcs for the past 500 years. AI can help us now come up with new story arcs, new ways of engaging with companies and customers that we've never been able to imagine before.
That is super exciting.
New frontiers, new possibilities.
Really on the thought of new frontiers and opportunities, you talk about AI being 3 years old, but the new baby and the new birth that probably people talk about these days, given the emergence of Trump, is the role around crypto.
Okay.
And of course the Genius Act in the States coming towards, and just the more mass adoption taking place. But then at the same time, you talked about quantum computing and the world of all bets are off and the world dynamic changes. And I know you know a lot about blockchain, and therefore, how do those two things align?
Well, one of the exciting things about tokenization is that agents that are going to be making lots of decisions, hopefully, will be able to transact much more effectively than what humans will using tokens.
So true.
Yeah. So now we still have to think about the real benefits of decentralization and this kind of stuff, but because a lot of the stuff that can be decentralized is just a database; it could just be kept in a secure database. But the idea of tokenization as a method to transact value, I think, is very exciting, particularly with the advent of agents.
But crypto, by its very notion, cryptography versus a world of quantum.
Yeah. Oh
Does it exist?
No. So there are academics that are exploring quantum cryptography. So even coming up with algorithms that quantum computers won't be able to break. So
Really?
yeah. I think I don't know enough about that field, but yes, standard cryptography in theory can be broken by quantum machines, but there are then quantum algorithms. They got quantum cryptography.
So the industry is safe.
Well, I don't know.
Potentially.
I don't want to make any claims about this. A lot of this stuff is still in R&D.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is research in this space.
Richie and I met somebody for lunch, and we were talking about the merits of working in a bank. Richie and I both worked at HSBC for a period of time, and so crypto / blockchain / all of these emerging technologies. I saw a headline the other day that sort of the legacy bank is doomed; it will be superseded by blockchain, et cetera. So, what's your take on the core financial services?
It's not a sector that I've really been involved with. I'm excited about blockchain and crypto from a currency perspective because I like the idea of decentralized models and in some respects the efficiency of it. So I have crypto myself. I don't quite understand yet why it hasn't taken off as much as it has, and arguably it might have taken off. I just haven't noticed it. But I do think these ideas, these technological ideas, are sound structures for more stable currencies. Yeah.
Dan, people often talk about, I'm talking about future-proofing careers. The first step one in that notion is thinking actually, become the expert when it comes to using AI. And I'm sure that's step one on this. But there's a little niggle in my mind. Maybe you can clarify whether I'm on the right or wrong path here, which is at some point in the future, in your short, medium, long-term perspective on it, are we even safe by simply becoming experts on AI? Or does it just get to a point where it's like, is it even worth it?
No, it's a great question actually, and it's something I think about most days. And so you've got people that are building these technologies, and so obviously having expertise in AI is useful. And then you've got people using these technologies, yes. And actually, I shouldn't admit this out loud, but I am one of the worst users of generative AI, and that's because all I know about is AI. And let me explain. We've got creatives in WPP, and the creatives that are thriving are actually the ones that have learned the classics, or art history, or history, or geography, or anthropology, or camera angles, lighting, aperture, and photography. They're able to ask questions of AI way better than I ever will. They're able to refer to some, type of artwork in some cave, in some corner of humanity that I will never ever know about, so that the AI will know about. So they're able to surface and render much better results because they're able to ask much better questions than I ever will. So I would argue that having this kind of breadth of knowledge allows you to engage with AI better. So I think that is actually a good skill to develop. And the reality is that I think that future-proofing careers is probably an oxymoron, and because I encourage people that just go and do whatever it is that sort of rings your bell. It's very hard to predict the future, and so do something that you become good at and that you enjoy, and I would just start there.
Love it.
Love
it. Circling back to education and potentially massively unfit for purpose education infrastructure today. I was talking to an unnamed CEO of one of the big tech who said that he actively encourages use of Gen AI for his kids' homework, but he himself has a quick play and says, if you're going to use it, you've got to do something better than this as a stock answer. Kids are a bit older, sort of, GCSE A-level age. You've got younger kids, I think 4 and 6, you said. So when does this switch on for them? What will your approach be? Take it personal. what does the next generation look
I
like?
am really struggling with this right now because I've got a 4-year-old that already wants a phone and that already knows how to talk to Google and start to watch things on YouTube she shouldn't be watching. And so I'm really struggling with this. Part of me, want actually them to get interested in video games and things like that, because I think there is a virtue in using these games to problem solve and critical think and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sort of more worried about social media and bullying. Even like, if you're a group of friends and they don't tag you in a image, or they don't invite you to a WhatsApp group, it's really hard. And so I don't know. Part of me wants to do the whole cigarette thing where you get them to smoke 50 cigarettes in a day and never smoke a cigarette again. So just overwhelm them, bombard them with these technologies so they get so bored and sick of it that they go and play in the dirt outside. But at the same time, I'm worried about kind of like the dopamine effect. And I don't know. I just my feeling is I can't protect them from the world. What I need to do is I need to try and figure out how do you build resilience and creativity and critical thinking into children. And I live in a bit of a bubble in Islington, and I've actually now started to try and take my kids to places around the world which give them experience to different cultures. People where people are happy but don't have the same stuff that they have. Just to Sri Lanka last week, for example, and so I need to. How do you make children resilient without putting them in suffering, too much suffering? I mean, I grew up in a small working class town. I was, I expected to go into the world of work at 12 years old, and I wasn't going to university. It was not even on the cards. And so, I had to develop my own sort of resilience and robustness, and how to do that with kids nowadays, I don't know.
Gosh, it must have been a tremendous disappointment that you didn't go out into the working world at 12.
I come from a small town called Morecambe. I'm probably not allowed to say this out loud, but I often say to people, there's only 2 ways to leave Morecambe. One is the army, and the other one was prison.
You found a third way. That's good for all of us.
I was actually going to go into the army. That was my path. But I managed to go to university.
Yeah.
Dan, we're coming to the end of the segment, and it's been so wonderful to have you on. And it's easy. And I think you've presented a very, very balanced view on what the future could hold for us. But what are you hopeful for in the future?
Oh, so going back to what I said about I think AI can free people to be more creative. And I'm hoping that people will use their creativity, use their time, use that gift that AI will give them to then think about how they can contribute to humanity. People often accuse me of trying to paint a picture of a utopia. I don't think that anybody would agree on what a utopia is. I think we'd agree on what a dystopia is, but there's a concept called a protopia, which is a sort of a system that's getting better. And, I'm not suggesting that there's a future world where all suffering is alleviated. There'll always be suffering. If we had a helicopter now, we'd be arguing who leaves first. Time and space is scarce. It's a scarce resource. Mates are a scarce resource. Experience is a scarce resource. There's always shit happens. But there's too much unnecessary suffering in the world. There's too many people that are living on $1 a day. And I what I'm hopeful for is giving those people access to goods and services that bring them to the point where they are economically free. And I don't think that ceiling is very high at all. And then once you reach that economic freedom, to hope that they use their humanity to make the lives of other people better.
Wow. I mean, we've covered so many things in the last period of time. Absolute privilege just to see inside the way that your mind works, Dan. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.